Thank you for checking out the Long Run Podcast. As you probably know, being a young adult is sometimes just as confusing as it can be exciting. Our 20s and 30s bring about many life-altering decisions and seasons of change. How we decide to live through those seasons will directly impact us in the long run. Our vision for this podcast is to help you make your life count by knowing Jesus, loving Him, and becoming like Him daily. Having said that, here's the next episode of the Long Run Podcast. We've got to come into some natural conversation here.
So did you watch my video of me falling?
I'm sorry. That was bad.
That was bad.
Hold on, but for the people that don't know, do tell.
Well, all it was just that we were...
No, there's no all it was.
Well, we might even put it out there on YouTube or something to show, but basically I was taking our two dogs out to go down to the corner because our elementary school locally was going to do a little parade. It got canceled because of the stay-at-home thing, but we were getting ready to go out. My two daughters are sitting on the porch, and I'm closing the door, and the dogs take off, and I don't realize it. And so I'm holding on both leashes, and then all of a sudden the bigger dog, Baylor, goes to the end of her little adjustable length leash, and she jerks me just off my feet, and I had no way to recover, and I was trying to hold on to the dogs and not hit my daughters who were sitting on the porch, and I just busted face first. Fortunately, I hit the grass with my face, but I hit a sprinkler head with my stomach and scraped my knee and knocked my daughter over. She got a couple little scratches on her knee and elbow. It wasn't pretty.
This was the same day I came over there and recorded with you.
And then you fell in the video.
I fell right there.
You fell in the video in that same spot.
But this was earlier in the day, that before I showed up.
Yeah, it was around noon when I fell. So
because you sent it to me that night, and I replied because it was from your doorbell, your little Nest doorbell camera, and I was like, "There's no way this is." I said, "Is this real?" And you said yes, and I think I just rolled on the floor. I was laughing so hard, it was bad.
The comments have been basically, I've watched this like 10 times and I can't stop laughing. So, I mean, people were laughing at my demise, but I didn't even think about the fact that we had it on video until like 4 hours later. Jan and I were talking and I go, "Oh my word, I bet we got it on video."
Because you told her and she probably didn't think much about it. Like you're exaggerating.
And then she started laughing and she just couldn't stop laughing.
Because you sent it to me and I immediately thought, I was like, wow, he really trusts me just to send me this whole video. Like, I'm not going to just send it to a bunch of people. But y'all ended up posting
Jan posted it. Yeah, she posted it. She asked permission, and I said, yeah, I don't care. It's funny. My noises were my favorite part. It's just when the or whatever, so.
I'm surprised none of your students here have took that and made a video out of it of their own, like a mixtape or a montage of adding a beat and stuff.
I'm sure they're really busy right now, so they don't have time to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, look, I'll tell you what happened to me yesterday. So I'm going to since we're just sharing what's going on in our lives, I went over to my cousin's house to work out and everything. It was about 400% humidity, it felt like yesterday, and we were outside, and I sound cool. I'm going to work out and everything. Well, I about died. You could see my shirt. My shirt was wet from my shoulders all the way down, and my sleeves were dry. So I'm like, you could just see where my body had just soaked this shirt. Mm-hmm. And I remembered when we got done, I was like, I have to go to the grocery store.
Oh,
and so I took my shirt off trying to wave it in the wind or whatever. The only thing that happened to it was got pollen all over it.
Oh, no.
And so I'm over there sneezing and everything, put my shirt back on. Well, I go to the grocery store that's right over here by campus. And I'm just sitting here thinking, I'm like, people are going to look at me like an alien walking in here. Yep. And not because I was just sweating over my shirt. I was thinking, though, in the back of my mind as I'm walking up, and I'm kind of laughing to myself because of the whole virus and everything, that they're going to relate that somehow. Like, he just broke a huge fever. And he's just sweating. And I was like, people are just going to looking at me. I'm looking like a weirdo. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go into the store. I walk past. There's no grocery carts. I walk in there. I can barely walk because my legs are hurting, and it was the complete opposite. I was actually looking at everybody else because everybody in that store had on a surgical mask.
Oh, wow.
Except me.
Yeah.
And I know people have been wearing it, but I'm talking about, just think of the mass of people in Kroger.
Yeah.
And I'm walking around, and and people were just kind of scurrying by you, and I'm looking at them. I'm like, oh, you must be sick. You got a mask on. I was like, I'm just walking around soaking up all this good air.
Yeah. Well, it's gotten serious. I mean, the last time I went to the store, everybody had a mask on. So it's crazy.
Are you wearing a mask?
I don't have one right now. So
I didn't get that they're wearing masks, but not gloves.
yeah.
That was kind of strange to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know.
Well, just don't touch your face if you pick up anything in the store. So, with a glove on or without. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for just listening to our humorous stories about our lives. Jeff falling and then me at the store feeling out of place. Well, thank you all for coming back to the Long Run Podcast. I'm Weston Downing.
I'm Jeff Jones, and we're glad that you guys joined us. But let me ask you this, Weston, as I'm thinking about what you just went through at the store with your mask. What are you thinking about this whole season, and what are your friends saying? What are other young adults like? How do they feel about this time? What are the emotions and the feelings that you're hearing in people your age?
It's good to be put on the spot, Jeff. You know, we always have a guest on. Now you're interviewing me, seems like.
I want to be that guy that's asking the questions for a little while.
Gotcha. Okay, that's fine with me. So what are people my age thinking?
Yeah.
Well, you know, everybody here listening, they've got something in their mind that's been going through that's a big deal during this time. But I've reached out to a few different people regarding things we could talk about on this podcast. Not that we're out of ideas. That'll be after 2 weeks from now, and then we'll be out of ideas. But no, things that are relevant, obviously, during this time. And a lot of people, a few things that they've said, or some of the obvious ones are loneliness, maybe falling back into sin that they thought they've kind of conquered. And, you know, you're sitting around all day, and or maybe it's just unproductivity. We had our family group meeting last night that I'll probably reference a few times on here. And our family group is a part of the Baptist Collegiate Ministry, and it's kind of like a Sunday school life group type setting, but not a part of a church, just a group of people getting together to study the Word. So we were asking kind of a few of these same questions last night. What have people been going through? Isolation, loneliness, kind of a depressing mood, falling back into some of these secret sins, and some of these bad habits that you thought you've kind of kicked to the curb.
Yeah. Well, what are they doing with their time? What are you doing with your time, and what are most people doing with their time that you've identified?
Right. So, you know, it's different. Some people are still working. Okay. So you have the crew. Like, I have got a good friend of mine who's my neighbor back home where I'm from when I'm not living at school. He works on air units and stuff like that. So he's like, well, everybody's out here off work. I'm still working. I was like, right, you're going to go fix people's air conditioning while they're not in the office and they don't need it. And so he's still busy working. You've got a lot of college students. They may have an internship. They're teleworking. They're probably working about 20 hours a week. And it's not that strenuous. You know, you're just checking emails and stuff like that. And then they're still doing schoolwork. And then you have the other group, maybe the freshmen and the sophomores in college. And, I mean, you're just trying to do every type of schoolwork you can do because you're kind of bored. Or maybe it's like you've got all these things you do need to do, but you don't want to do them at all.
Right.
And so I'll tell you one thing for me personally, if all I had to do was schoolwork, I would be bored out of my mind.
Sure.
You know, University of Memphis, being a business major, it's a hard degree. There's a lot of work being a marketing major. I'm just joking. I'm not trying to knock the university. We have a great university, but my workload is not as heavy as, say, an accounting major.
Right.
Or maybe a biology major. I don't know. I don't step into the science department. But, yeah, like I said, if all I had to do was schoolwork, I'd probably be building a pyramid in my backyard or something. I don't know. I'd be working on something. But, yeah, so I work, too. I work for a congressman around here, so I've been getting phone calls all day. And it's kind of weird how my work is right now because I may just get a phone call whenever that are forwarded from our office. And I just listen to people's concerns, and because everybody's got something different from a small trouble to a huge one. That they've got a business of 300 people that they can't do payroll. And so it's a hard time for a lot of people that the college student may say, well, I'm just bored. And then these people on the other side that, you know, I can't make payroll this week. And so it's scary stuff.
What about like disappointments? Like for you specifically, as you think about, you know, basically life as you expected it to be starting in March of this year after spring break all the way until now in May, what are some disappointments, some things that have really just sort of like, if you're honest, you just sort of frustrated or sad or disappointed?
I would say the big one that's on the top of my mind right now would have to be my graduation. Because it's funny that you asked that, because I just received an email probably 2 hours ago that announced University of Memphis will be doing an online commencement.
Yeah.
Now, they said that was up in the air, but they may try to do a traditional commencement and graduation early fall, somewhere in August. But as of right now, from what I just skimmed the email, I think we're strictly sticking to, with all the information they had on there that we need to send in, we're strictly sticking to an online commencement. And that's kind of sad.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not the type of person who's like, man, I just want to walk across the stage and get my diploma. But for my my parents are paying for the full experience. But I want to walk across stage. But more importantly, I was talking to a buddy of mine, Stephen Molesky, the other day. I think it was Sunday afternoon on the phone. He was like, man, I would like to do it just to kind of say bye to everybody.
Sure.
And I was like, I agree.
Yeah.
Because when you kind of get up to seniors in college, your classrooms and your class settings and your capstone classes, they tend to get smaller.
Yep.
And you do more group projects, and you do get closer to these people that you've seen the past 2 years within your college of study. Mm-hmm. And you do want to have kind of that last goodbye, because it's high school. You definitely probably don't keep up with hardly anybody from there, maybe. Yeah. And then college, I think it may be even worse, because you start moving to this life where you're eventually going to get married and stuff like that, and your group of friends are less, and depending on where you move, I mean, you can speak to that probably more. But so the biggest disappointment for me would be that. Other one would be just seeing people.
Sure.
I'm trying my best to call people and stuff, but it doesn't replace, because it really has to be a lot of effort. You may call somebody for 30 minutes. Well, that's one person. Yeah. Versus you walk on campus or you go to church and you've already seen 15, 20, 30 people you can say hey to and everything. But
and you don't see that anymore. You don't think about a lot of the people that you may not see all the time, but you still see them, and those are the only connections you would have. You know what I'm saying? But what about benefits? I mean, do you think young adults would look at this time, especially if they're not working a consistent job, or maybe they have school or something like that, but is there any benefit or anything good that's coming from this, I guess, the new kind of living style, lifestyle that the people have right now? So what benefits have you seen, or do you see any?
Yeah, and it's a hard too to think about, because the different age groups and responsibilities that are on the end of the spectrum. Like I mentioned, you're an adult running a business, you got to make payroll, 300 people. There is no benefit. There's really not. It's crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It is. Now with our age group, and then you think about even children. You mentioned, I think, on our first podcast episode, if you're a kid during this time, middle school, high school, you're going to remember these times, because that's when you were playing, board games with your parents. You were cooking things together and doing all these things. Now with young adults, how will we remember this time? And the benefits would be, for me, it feels like a reset button to life. Good. Yeah. Because I easily crave being busy, and I think doing more things is being more productive, when obviously that's not the truth. I had my weightlifting coach in high school told me very early on, he's like, Weston, you need to limit how many irons you have in the fire. You're going to get burned. I was like, this is true. Simple thing that we've all heard, but it always resonated with me from him saying that.
That's powerful, because number one, to know that you had a weightlifting coach sort of shocks me. But number two, that the caution of don't put too many irons in the fire and maintain balance in your life. That's good wisdom.
And so if you're, I guess you can imagine an octopus with a bunch of tentacles, and you're trying to have your hand in maybe all these different departments and areas of your life, whether it be church, business, your career, like all these different things that we can come up with.
Relationships and so on.
Or even it's not even in different departments, but in one area, too many, it doesn't matter. You're involved in too many things, too many committees, too many volunteer things that you got going on that you can't devote and be sold into, like Laird talked about the previous week, be where you're at.
Right.
And yes, that's not looking to the next thing, but it's being not attached to so many different things in the same moment. Yeah. And that's been cut off for me. Kind of what you're asking. So the benefit during this time is I can kind of reset and catch up on my to-do list personally, and plug back into this time with God. Yeah. I'll be pretty transparent. Like, my time with the Lord has gotten significantly better going from last fall into here. It didn't take the coronavirus for me to, start getting back into the Word. If anything, it's given me more time to try to latch onto Him, just because I'm just I just want to know him more.
Yeah.
And so that's
Yeah.
not trying to sound super holy, because it's
No.
hard every day, and I wake up and I'm just like, I don't feel like praying.
I know, right? Yeah. It doesn't matter. I mean, even if you do have the coronavirus and the freedom during that coronavirus stage that we're in right now, you still have to discipline yourself in those areas for sure. So I think about what the typical, I guess, responses of people in crisis, and this is a crisis. So what are the typical responses? I think about things like fear is one that I've heard a lot of people talk about. And I think we were already a culture of anxiety more than we've ever been, and worry and things of that nature. But now we've got fear all the way ranging from fear to like apathy. Some people just don't care. It doesn't change
Isn't
who
that
they are.
crazy?
Yeah, it's like they still do block parties and, it's just like don't take into consideration anything.
And like
They
the people in Florida, like,
yeah, the ones that went on spring break and
you saw that.
that they said, we don't care, we're going to be down here, and most of them now have the coronavirus. So it sort of catches up to you. But I think about self-reliance all the way to things like needing or codependency on somebody else during this time. Is that people become really needy from other people because they don't know how to respond.
Right.
And I think our responses are based a lot on maybe who we are, or who we put our trust in, things like that. And it tells a lot about our character. It doesn't mean that our character is established and it can't be changed. It just means that how we respond to this whole thing has a lot to do with what's at the core of our heart. So I think about people I've seen and experienced on social media, people who've blamed things, or they've rebelled, they've avoided, they've not cared, or some people defend. They come up with what do you call it? Conspiracies, all that kind of stuff. So you have all those things. But I think a lot of people, the worry that I have is a lot of people are going, I just can't wait until this is over. Well, what that says is you're not, like Laird talked about last week, you're not being in the moment. It doesn't mean that you thoroughly enjoy going through difficulties, but I think there's a really important part here for us to go, hey, what is it that I can gain from this time that I couldn't if it were a regular schedule?
Right.
So that's just an interesting take, so.
And like what you say, it's almost this like mindset of, I guess, obviously people without Christ, and their hope is in this world, and that's where their ambitions and their glories lie.
Yeah.
Within the world and what's seen and what's easily going to fade away, whether it's they die tomorrow or Jesus comes back next week.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's still going to fade away. And they're freaking out, grabbing guns off the shelf, which I might be too. You know what I mean? But grabbing food, and they're just gloom, despair, and it's troubling times. But as Christians, though, are we sitting here, like you said, just holding on, I just got to make it to the storm. I just got to. Is that the spirit we have in us?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, is that what God calls us to do? Is to be fearful and worry, or is it to trust in Him? Well, I think about how that kind of situation, most young adults, here's the word I hear most, is I'm bored. That's what I hear. And I think the real danger in boredom is based on something I read. I read a book by Eric Geiger called How to Ruin Your Life. And, he talks in that book about David and Bathsheba's situation specifically. As a matter of fact, let me just read a couple of those verses, because the things that he talked about in that book, one of the things he mentioned was the concept of implosion. Do you know what implosion is?
Not off the top of my head, Joe.
You know what explosion is?
Yes, big boom.
Implosion is like years ago, the Baptist hospital here in Memphis was imploded because they were making room for new buildings and things like that. So what they did is in the columns and the structures and the foundations of that building, they attached dynamite, and they specifically placed it in the supports that would hold up the building, and they blew those supports up first. So that caused the building to collapse in on itself.
Wow.
It didn't just explode and go everywhere, but they were trying to limit the situation. And so in David's life, we see an implosion of the man who's the greatest man, got a heart for God, and he implodes. What's the story? You know the story, basically.
And, we all know the story of his origin.
Yeah.
David and Goliath.
Right.
And, by God's power, David was able to defeat Goliath with 3 stones, one he only used in a slingshot. And we hear that story and it's like, wow, God is so just awesome, is the way to describe it. And how he can defeat anything. Not he's just going to defeat the giant in our life or whatever we muster up that Goliath may symbolize. It's like, no, because God, it's like it's almost the same thing as Philippians 4:13. Like
I can do all things. Yeah.
Right. I can get through this time because of him. Not meaning he's just going to eliminate everything in my path and I'm going to live a clean and happy and healthy life. But what we forget about when in David's origin, when it comes to the story of David and Goliath, David wasn't just this random little shepherd boy that was plucked up and, God's going to use him. Like he was prepared for this time going into David and Goliath in that whole setting. Like, well, did it say he killed like a lion?
And a bear.
A lion and a bear defending his sheep. And it was like, well, if he can do that, not saying he can defeat Goliath, who's that tall, because, it was one stone to prove who God is.
Yeah.
To prove what God can do.
Exactly.
But that's his story. And so we're moving in with this. God has his hand on David, moving into his latter years, which you're, I'm guessing, about to read.
Right. And he becomes a king. He gets really popular. He's leading the people to follow God. But then in 2 Samuel chapter 11, it says in verse 1, which tells you a little bit about what happens. It sounds really similar to what we're going through. It says, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. So here's the first thing that the book How to Ruin Your Life says, is that the first step toward implosion is isolation. Well, what are we in right now? Well, we're in government-mandated isolation. We're staying at home by ourselves. And some college students have more alone time than they've ever had in their lives. Some young adults are saying, I'm working from home. Nobody's here. Maybe my roommate's here occasionally, but we have our own isolation abilities. So David, the first step in that breaking down his life and foundation is isolation. The second one is in verse 2, and it says, it happened late one afternoon. I want to see if this sounds familiar to a lot of young adults. It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch. Okay, so we're talking about...
That's in the Bible.
That's in the Bible. One afternoon, late in the afternoon, David arose from his couch. And so it says, what I think is funny is the fact that it's just like a lot of what I'm hearing right now from young adults is, I slept till 2, or I slept till 3, or I slept till noon, or and we're missing out, and they're staying up late, and their life is losing a lot of productivity. But what they're doing is, this symbolizes boredom. David had boredom in his life because he wasn't on mission, on task, on purpose for what he was supposed to be doing. And instead, he's sitting on his couch, and he decides to go take a walk on the roof of his palace, and he sees a woman bathing from another rooftop, and the woman was beautiful. So we've got isolation. You're already headed down the bad road. Then boredom, and that leads to sin. And then pride. And the pride talks about this as David, as king, says in a few verses later, he said, David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent word and told David, I am pregnant. So here's where this goes into pride. And the concept is that David's pride was there, and he had gotten to the point where he no longer just depended on God. He just was self-reliant. And his pride, it happens in all of us, is what took him to implosion. And all of a sudden his life starts to fall apart. What are some of the other things he does? Well,
he broke every single one of the commandments. He broke all the 10 commandments within this act because, one, he stole something that wasn't his, being what was Bathsheba's husband name?
Uriah. Yeah.
Uriah. Stole Uriah's wife. He committed adultery. He coveted before that. He murdered him by sending him to the front lines to die. By doing all these acts, he dishonored his father and his mother. Yeah. But in essence, I ain't going to go through them all because I can't remember. Because he broke all the 10 commandments.
Yeah. He lies and does it all. And that pride caused him to even cover up his sin initially with more sins to protect his reputation, protect his pride, and keep it from looking like a bad situation. Mm-hmm. And I think what happens is there's a real danger, and that's what the concern here is that there's a real danger that if we don't go one way, we're going to fall back on the other way. And so David, because he was bored, and boredom, I think, and even in this book it says boredom is a sin, which I never really thought about it that way before, but boredom is saying I'm not satisfied with what God has given me to either do or to enjoy in this world. And if we're bored, it's because we're not practically putting into place some things in our lives like activities or purpose or productivity, like we talked about 2 weeks ago. And I think it's just saying David was going down this road because he wasn't fulfilling the purpose that God had placed him on this earth for. And in this time, I think we can do that too. We can say, hey, I don't know. I think you mentioned earlier that if we're not going upstream, what are we doing?
We're going downstream. So if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward, kind of what you just said a minute ago.
Right.
And, even David, was it Nathan who confronted him about this? But Nathan confronted him about his sin and what he did. And that's what we need. That shows an importance in our life of people that we need to look into our life, to speak into our life. And we need community, but it's hard when it seems like it's all stripped away and it's only running through video call and all this stuff now. But even if you think about Nathan and his sin, correct me if I'm wrong, when Nathan approached him with kind of like a parable or a story after David committed this act and Nathan knew about it, did he know about it from God?
Yeah, just God had led him to identify this. But, I mean, he may have seen signs as well.
Right, and he goes up to him with the story of, there's this king in a far land or something like that, and there's a shepherd or a peasant. He has a sheep as well. The king has everything he can want and ever have, and he should be grateful for it. But what does the king do? He goes down to the lowly man and takes what doesn't belong to him. And David is just furious when he hears this story, and he looks back at Nathan. He says, who is this man? We need to go find him. We need to bring him to justice. And immediately Nathan turns to him and says, that's you, David.
Yeah, you are the man.
You are the man. And we need people to speak into our life. And, our mission and heartbeat behind this podcast, we've said it before, is that we know Jesus, we love him, and we be like him. And so when it comes to knowing Christ, we have to know that, like, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, I don't know if I'm going to die tomorrow with this coronavirus, and you're just scared because that's what these times are putting us in.
Sure.
You have responsibilities that are falling through, and you're beginning to see that the hope in the hope that you put into the world of living your best life here and making all this money and living a comfortable life is looking like it could slip through your fingers. And I'm not just trying to scare you, but the fact is, because I heard this from Ray Comfort, who's a big evangelist. He said, we're all a part of a statistic that 1 out of 1 people die. And that's kind of scary. And Ray said with his personal testimony, he said, I'm literally standing in a line when he realized, because he woke up one day, he goes, look, I wasn't like a drug addict or anything like that before I started following Christ. I didn't have this crazy testimony. He says, I had a good life, a good childhood, and I was running a business. I had a beautiful wife. He said, I woke up one day and I said, death could literally take all this from me.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm standing in a line of people walking off a cliff. He goes, I'm poking my head out, seeing if I can get out of the line.
Yeah.
A lot of people, we don't know that our house is on fire, and we think, for whatever reason, we may not believe, in something after death or the afterlife, what we may call it. Even if you don't believe in that, even if you say you don't believe anything, it doesn't dismay the fact that it still exists.
Yeah.
If I say, that paved road doesn't exist out there, well, it still exists. If I jump off a building and say I can fly, it doesn't matter. I can't. It doesn't ruin the fact of what is actually there. And so when we think about that, and when we think about David's life and these sins that he committed, he committed murder and all these different things. Like, we may think we'll rest in the fact that we're a good person going to heaven, and that we're not as bad as maybe a murderer that's in prison or something like David did.
Yeah.
But Jesus destroyed those facts when he came into the earth, and he said, look, if you hate your brother, you're a murderer.
Yeah.
It's like, what? He said, if you look at a woman with lust, way before what happened with Bathsheba, if you look at her with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart. You're breaking these 10 commandments already.
That's right.
And then what's the cure to that? Well, Jesus came to the earth. He lived and he died and he was crucified. He paid for the sins of the world. he was crucified on that cross, because it's the power of what the gospel is. And he said on that cross, "It is finished," meaning our debt has been paid.
Right. Yeah.
And he was buried in the tomb for 3 days, and to prove he was dead, and he resurrected and defeated everything together. And so, like, that just, I mean, the gospel came across my mind when we think about this, because that's where our hope is. That, because that's not just the power for people to come to Christ, that's the power for the believers.
That's right. And when you think about a situation like this, I think it leads right into a verse that a lot of people are using and talking about, and that's 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. And maybe you've heard it before. A lot of people have used it in talking about things like revival or something like that. But in this situation, it's a personal response to God. And the situation that we see it in is a little bit more related to Solomon, which is ironically David's son. And Solomon has done some things that are good and done some things that are bad, but God is basically telling Solomon, hey, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. And I think one of the things that during this time, we could break that verse down into a couple of things, but the first one is this: if my people, which are called by my name, and you just talked about it, I mean, you just said it, the only way that you can be God's people, a lot of people think, well, I'm God's child because we're all God's children. No,
Right.
Scripture doesn't teach that.
Right.
It teaches that you're separated from God until you're adopted into his family when you surrender your life to Christ. John 1, verse 12 says, as many as received him, to those he gave the power to become children of God, to those who called on his name. So until we come and say, I need your name, I want to be adopted into your family, I need my sins forgiven, would you come into my life? You're not a follower, a child of God.
Right.
And so if my people, which are called by my name, so if you evaluate yourself first in that, but then secondly, it says, humble yourselves. I don't know, how do you humble yourself? I mean, what does it look like to humble yourself?
Well, you mentioned this earlier, or I think I saw it when you were writing your notes earlier. You mentioned self-reliance.
Yeah.
And that's the byproduct of pride.
Yeah.
And saying I can do it on myself, or I can just do everything. I can rely on myself. I need my own. I can handle my own strengths until that's stripped away. And you said I can't do it anymore. So I think we need to humble ourselves, even when it's natural for us to want to be reliant on ourselves and what we can do. But saying pushing ourselves down, we decrease, and Christ increase, and we look up.
Yeah. Practically for me, I think about humbling myself as getting on my knees. And I mean, it's a physical act, but it's basically me by myself on my knees saying, God, I need you. I'm desperate for you. I'm not doing well by myself at all. And John chapter 15 talks about that apart from me, you can do nothing. If we see ourselves in that light, we automatically humble ourselves, and we get to the point where we just say, God, I'm desperate for you. I need you. I humble myself before you. And that's what he calls us to do, is to if we're his people, we humble ourselves. And then what does it say?
That we will pray and seek his face. Is that... Now, you mentioned this earlier, Jeff. He said, okay, we'll humble ourselves. In the next, it says, and pray and seek my face. And you said they were different. Now, describe to me how those are two different things. Well,
prayer can be easily, you think about it. When you think about most people who say, in the American church at least, I prayed today. Well, they may pray for something, for our own benefit. Most of our prayers, if given to our selfish desires, most of our prayers are for our own benefit. Lord, help me today not to get sick. Help me today not to have a wreck. Keep me safe. Bless this food that I'm about to receive. It becomes a real selfish thing. And so prayer, when it's in this category, is saying, God, I want to seek your will in my life. I pray that you would align my life with you. And I seek your face, as in, if you think about just something you really desire in your life, if you pursue that with great passion and great desire, you know what it is to seek after something. If you've lost something that's really important to you, you know what it is to seek after something. Well, it's the same principle, is that you may feel distant from God, but if you say, God, I'm going to spend time with you, and I'm going to pray and seek your face, which means I want to be as close to you as I possibly can. I want to be like you. I want to love you, just like what we were talking about, the purpose of the podcast.
Right.
You know?
And I got a question here. So so God is talking to Israel right here, but this applies to us as Christians.
Yeah.
And so if this is addressing Christians and maybe not unbelievers, if it's applying to Christians that we need to pray and seek His face, it's like, it means you've got to do something. Because I would say seek your face is like how you described it, but how I would summarize it would be that God is your number one priority, and He's the number one concern on your heart. And we say that, and every Christian's gonna be like, yep, yeah, he is. And I would have said that 2 years ago. I've been following Christ for 5 years, and it's like, I think we said in the first episode, it's like a roller coaster, you know what I mean?
Is, yeah.
And I was like, I think I'm just beginning to learn what it means to deny myself and pick up my cross, because I was like wanting to run a business and be successful. And I was like, well, I can do that, but the byproduct, I'll use it for God's glory. And I meant well, but what was first? I'm going to run a business and be successful, not, okay, God, if you want me to go be a missionary, I'll do that. If you want me to live an ordinary life and get a job and serve you, I'll do that. But it was, what do I want to do?
Right. And I think that's how our life has typically been, is if you think about it, we normally are looking for our own benefit through the whole process. But when we start to really be what this verse is calling us to be, it means that we start looking for the glory of God in our lives, not for our benefit, but for His benefit. We actually want to enjoy Him and walk with Him and seek His face and pursue Him with the same passion that we maybe pursued a career or a spouse or whatever. But instead, we say, God, you are my goal.
Right.
You're what I want.
And I think when we're saying pray and that, especially seek your face, that leads into what He says like right after, when He says, okay, so He'll say that you pray and seek my face and that they will turn from their wicked ways. I heard we did a discipleship intensive with Chick-fil-A's WinShape nonprofit organization here at the Baptist Collegiate Ministry, and one little kind of sentence or quote phrase that I walked away with, I had it wrote down here to make sure I said it correctly. It said, stop trying to not sin and start pursuing Jesus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's one of those things, like I've probably said it before on here, is that when I got married to my wife, in my vows, I said, from this point on, I forsake all others and cling only to you. Well, if you're clinging to Jesus, your hands are occupied. Your mind, your heart is occupied. And so if we're doing that, we're pursuing Him, and that's what causes us to walk away and turn away from sin. So it may be that in our lives, especially as if you're at home right now, out there listening to us or watching us, if you're at home right now and you're finding yourself caught in sin consistently, a lot of times you're finishing with that sin, or you're walking away from that sin going, I'm not going to do that anymore. Well, you've already said right there that you are, because you're saying, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Right.
Well, turn from your wicked ways by pursuing and seeking Christ. If you're spending time in prayer and in His Word, not just like praying through a list or something like that, but literally on your knees, humbling yourself, praying and seeking His face and saying, God, I want to know you. I want to walk with you. I want you to do these things in my life. I want you to give me purpose today. And then you're taking His Word and you're feasting on it.
Yeah.
Then what's going to happen is your desires are going to start to change, and you're going to turn from your wicked ways. But it's going to be because you say, hey, I want to follow you. But here's what I love is that usually Scripture always has sort of these conditions for us that are not like, necessarily a formula, but in some ways it's very similar to a formula, is that if you will do these things, then here's what I'll do. Right. And so it's sort of like Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and then He will direct your paths. Well, here He says, I'll heal your land, and I will forgive your sin. I love the fact that God hears us. He heals us. He restores us. He gives us purpose and peace again. And so I think a lot of people are walking through this situation, and they're trying to figure out how just to sort of survive, or how to, not be bored, or, and we're looking at creative things to do that'll waste our time.
Right. And I think, sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're not. Keep going.
Will Burrows that works here at the BCM, he said to me, we were on like a video call the other day, and if I remember correctly, he's like, sometimes I think This is what he said. He said, sometimes I think we forget how dark our sin is and how much grace God has, or to the essence, that's what he said. And that makes me think, like I said, sorry I interrupted you.
No, keep going.
When we talk about turning from our wicked ways and seeking God's face, I wrote down Psalm 66, verse 18. It says this, he writes, if I had cherished sin in my heart, the Lord would not have listened. And it just shows how how sin can really distort our prayers and drive that wedge between our relationship, and it can become a snowball. Yeah. And then you look up and you say, God, where'd you go? And it's like, no, he didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, and our sin does. It really blinds us. It's darkness, and it causes us to even think through, what is my purpose here? It brings, I think sin and not doing these things in our daily lives, it causes us to feel anxiety even more. It causes us to feel boredom and things like that. So
I was we were kind of talking about something in the similar ballpark about pursuing God and chasing after him and his relationship, and strengthening your faith within that, and working out your salvation, meaning just growing your faith. Like, you have a responsibility on your part. God said the work that he began in you, he will continue to do, but you have to work out your salvation, not work for it, like you said earlier, because you're already saved. But like how you have muscles in your body, like I try to do, like I have muscles, they're not very big, but I work those out to get stronger. Like your faith, you continue to work it out because that's your responsibility. We were talking about that kind of last night in our family group, and Tia, who is a Frost Camp counselor here at the University of Memphis, she's friends with, I think, Tucker Chumley. I'm throwing names around here just to get me to my point. She's only joined 2 of our video calls. I don't know her that well, but I'll shout out to her because she brought a point, like a different perspective. She mentioned, I hope she's okay with me sharing this, but I'll keep it brief. That some of us can be perfectionists sometimes, and saying we gotta, have this relationship with God, gotta turn from our sin. That can be kind of daunting when we're already in the midst of everything. It sounds more like works and duty rather than hope and rest. But that's exactly what it is, though. Like, when we talk about these things, like, we run to the Father, and he holds us, and there's hope, and there's rest, and there is love, and is the only reason that I believe that Jesus died from the cross was because of what he's done in my life, and the love that I've felt, and the change that I've seen in my life. And like I said, this can sound like a to-do list, but it can be dark times for us.
Yeah. But I think you need sometimes a to-do list just to make it through, especially times like this, is that we've got to have something that sort of drives our passion for the Lord. So with that, like you mentioned it earlier, what would be the challenge with this? Kind of like our step from here. Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things that jump out to me. One is that at the end of this whole stay at home, quarantine, whatever you want to call it, at the end of all this time where we are basically avoiding other humans as much as possible, we're going to come out of that situation in a month, 2 months, who knows how long. And at the end of that time, who are you going to be that's any different than you are today? If, let's say that your last week that you've spent, if you take that out and you multiply that times the next few months, is there going to be anything in your life that you can say, during this time, this is what God did in my life? Or are you going to say, that was the worst time of my life, that I'm full of regret because I wasted it? Is that there can be so much that God does. Man, you said it earlier, a reset button. I mean, this is a great time to really reset your life, reset your priorities. Say, not just when this happens, I'll start doing this, but start doing things right now that lay a foundation for the rest of your life and what you want it to be about. And I think there's 2 choices. There's either passivity or there's passion. You're either going to be passive during this time or you're going to be passionate. And I think it's a decision that you need to pray about and think about and plan for and produce, is make the most of this time. We've talked about that in the first episode that we did together, is making the most of the time because the days are evil.
I like what you said, because you're either passionate or you're passive.
Yeah.
Forward or backward. And I'm a very big picture type of guy. I'm what I've been lately, when I'm just trying to dig into my faith more, looking, for answers about this and answers about that, to just add to my faith of having in Jesus Christ. And I said to myself last night before getting into bed, I have deep conversations with myself. I said, look, I was just kind of talking to myself like a crazy person. And I said, if Jesus didn't die on the cross and raise from the dead, I was like, I'm not wasting my time with going to church. But I was like, I know he did. And I was like, I just have to give my life to this, or try at least. I say that now, but I hope I won't, and pray that I won't be distracted like I have been before. But and so like if he's done this change in the life, it's come to that point of just pressing into him more, and you're just going to see how he changes your life even more, like strips away things you're wanting to get rid of. And it's a crazy ride. It's a crazy experience. But
it's worth it. But it's worth it.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Well, that was a heavy ending.
Yeah.
There, I got really deep. I'm sorry.
No, man, that's exactly what we want to accomplish. That's what we want to accomplish.
Well, Jeff, thanks for bringing a lot of good thoughts to hear. You had a bunch of talking points to kind of get this going. I appreciate you doing that. All that good stuff.
Thank you for sharing from your life.
And let's thank our listeners.
Yeah.
You've made it to the end. I would reward you with another funny story, but you've already listened long enough, and I don't have anything better to say.
That sounds like a plan.
So, but if you want to check us out on more episodes, I think this would be season 2, episode 3.
Yeah.
I told Jeff we're not going to mention episodes, but I've got to get my mind right with the season and everything, so I'll reiterate it. This was season 2, episode 3. You can find other episodes on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Just simply type in the Long Run Podcast and it will pop up. And if you don't have access to those, you've got a family member that wants to maybe watch a video portion, you can type in on YouTube the Long Run Podcast, or probably more effectively my name, because I got to keep my name in. It's on my personal YouTube channel, so Weston Downing on YouTube, and then we're on www.thelongrunpodcast.org. So that's all that information. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.